So I would like to welcome the audience once again to a recording with Elan with commentary on the music of the Gurdjieff de Hartmann oeuvre. And I think he's going to treat us today to a discussion of the musical environment that de Hartmann was working in. Is that right, Elan?
Yes.
Okay. Well, take it away.
All right. So I think at this point in our journey through these conversations, it's time to say something about who Thomas de Hartmann was, to just put him into perspective, because it's going to inform a lot of what we talk about afterwards in terms of the movements and also the music. So I want to begin with, I think it would be good to begin really at the very, very, very beginning, which is Thomas de Hartmann's birth date. And in order to do that, I need to tell you a story. So when I went to meet Madame de Hartmann for the first time, and this was in 1975, she invited me over to give a concert, to play in a concert at McGill University. She wanted me to play Thomas de Hartmann's modern idiom, not the Gurdjieff de Hartmann music so much. And she gave me a little catalog of Thomas de Hartmann's works. And on it said Thomas de Hartmann, 1886 to 1956. Well, later I went to Princeton, Princeton, New Jersey, where Thomas de Hartmann is buried, and now Madame is also buried there. And on the tombstone it said Thomas de Hartmann, 1885 to 1956. And more recently, Tom Daly, who has the ownership, he looks after the Thomas de Hartmann estate, has come up with the fact that Thomas de Hartmann was actually born in 1884. So it's gone from 1886 to 1885 to 1884. Who knows where it's going to go next, his birth date. And I think it would be appropriate to tell you a story that Madame de Hartmann told me on the first day that I met her. And it went something like this. She said to me, so when I first went to visit her, I walk into a house, and in the house there is a chair that, an electric chair lift that goes up the stairs, and I thought that I was going to be meeting a geriatric lady who, was in very poor shape. And instead, to my surprise, when she came down the stairs, she was like this. She was straight as an arrow, and she came into the room, and she gave me a very difficult time. And that's another story which I can get into. But at a certain point, she said to me, "How old do you think I am?" Well, before she did that, she said to me, she told me about how a woman should tell her age to other people. And she said like this: when she's 21, she says she's 21. When she's 22, she says 20. When she's 23, she says 19. When she's 24, she says 22. When she's 25, she's 21. And it goes on like this. This is the way she told me. It goes on like this until the woman herself doesn't remember how old she is. So, and then she said to me, "How old do you think that I am?" And I looked at her and I thought to myself, she must be at least 80 years old. So I said, 65. And she said, "Don't be foolish. Tell me how old you really think I am." And so I said, "Well, Madame, I think you must be about 80 years old." And she said, "Yes, that's correct." Well, when she died 4 years later in the obituary, it said that she was 94. So even then, she was telling me a tall tale. Now, let's go back to Thomas de Hartmann's birth date. Thomas de Hartmann, born in 1884, why would somebody want to make him appear younger? Well, why would Madame want to make him appear younger? Well, it's obvious, because she wanted him to be seen as a child prodigy, even more than he was. All right, so now, right now, we have this idea that Thomas de Hartmann was born in 1884. As I said, who knows? It could change again. And he was born in what is now eastern Ukraine, born into the Russian aristocracy, and which has created a very interesting situation now that his music is coming out, because he's Ukrainian, but he's also Russian. So the politics is also, there are interesting things that are going on with the political situation for him too. So he's born into this aristocratic family, and you'll notice his name is Thomas de Hartmann. So there's a German heritage that goes back probably, and we don't know for sure. I don't know for sure, but it seems like it could be that that he was part of this migration at the time of Catherine the Great, where a lot of German people settled in Ukraine. Now, we also have Thomas, not von Hartmann, but Thomas de Hartmann, and the de is the French prefix, which indicates that he is part of the Russian aristocracy. Hence, we have Thomas de Hartmann. All right. Now, he was born on what seems to be a huge, huge, huge estate. Hundreds, maybe even 1,000 acres of land out in the middle of someplace in eastern Ukraine. His father was an officer of the Imperial Guard that looked directly after the Tsar. And by the way, many composers like Stravinsky and a number of the Russian composers at that time were part of the Russian Imperial Guard, or they had titles in the military. Well, anyway, his father was in the Imperial Guard, and that'll come up in a moment when I talk about his education, Thomas's education. But before we get there, I want to mention that the family itself came from a very, very highly cultured heritage. And I now have to look at the notes because I want to get the dates. His great uncle, and these two uncles of his, two great uncles, strangely enough, were sort of pointing in two directions that de Hartmann would go into aside from music as major interests in his life. First of all, we have Victor Hartmann, 1834 to 73. He was the painter who painted the painting of the Great Gate of Kiev, and which was the inspiration for the pictures at an exhibition by Mussorgsky. So this connection with art, with painting, was very, very important for Thomas de Hartmann, as we will see. The other uncle that he had was Eduard von Hartmann, and he was in Germany, 1842 to 1906, and he wrote The Philosophy of the Unconscious. And so this was an indication of this interest in something, what was going on beneath the surface, the beginning, the whole thing of the spiritual search. Both of these uncles, as I say, pointed in this direction that Thomas de Hartmann was going to take, these two directions. And the third thing that was important to Thomas de Hartmann was the Russian fairy tale. And he talks about this he writes about this and he composes music. And I want to actually begin today's little bit of playing of Thomas de Hartmann's music with a piece related to the Russian fairy tales. But before I do that, I want to say that at the beginning, in his book, Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff, he has this quote, which is the basis, the underlying basis of the aim of the Russian fairy tales. Go, and this is go not knowing where, bring or find not knowing what. The path is long, the way unknown. The hero knows not how to arrive there by himself alone. He has to seek the guidance and help of the higher forces. So that's from his autobiography. And in the introduction to the music, he writes something about the reason that he is composing these fairy tales. And I have to say, the fairy tales were not composed in his early childhood. They were composed in 1937 or 1938. And they were orchestrated and also then composed for the piano. And I will play one of them. One of the aims, and I'm just going to read to you, one of the aims of this collection is to bring Western man in touch with the world of the Russian fairy tales through the music. Their charm is due not only to the fantasy of the images, the interest in the story, the sparks of humor, the popular spirit and wisdom, all of which elements are found generously sprinkled through these tales, but they are infinitely beautiful because they already have many elevated and profound ideas. It is not merely by chance that mention is incessantly made of the kingdom of marvels, the kingdom of light and life, whose task it is the heroes to reach, etc. So this is the reason that he's composing this music, is he wants to bring the music to children so that they become aware of this meaning that is in the Russian fairy tales. And I thought that it would be interesting, even though it's somewhat out of sequence in terms of his compositional work, to begin by playing you one of his Russian fairy tales so that you can see a number of things about who Thomas de Hartmann was. And you have to keep in mind, this is a piece of music for a child to be played by intermediate level pianists who are children. And so it's not extremely subtle or profound, but it contains many aspects of what Thomas de Hartmann is as a composer. So I want to begin by, it tells a story in music. And the piece that I want to play for you is called The Witch's House on Hen's Legs. The Witch's House, the witch is Baba Yaga, who has iron teeth and eats children, probably has an oven that she cooks them in. And in order for you to understand this music, you have to hear the melody that goes with the hero of these fairy tales, which is Prince Ivan Tsarevich. Prince Ivan Tsarevich and the Princess Vasilisa the Wise and what was her? There was the wise and beautiful Princess Vasilisa are the two heroes of this. And the music, the sound that you hear for Prince Ivan Tsarevich goes like this. And then it goes on. There is a piece of music that is written to indicate who Ivan Tsarevich is, but that's not the piece that I want to focus on. You just need to know that appears in this piece. So, The Witch's House on Hen's Legs. Maybe it's be best if I just play it through for you, and then we can take it apart and see how Hartmann makes it meaningful, how he brings out the meaning of this. If we see this, then it will also give us an indication, parallel to this, of what he's doing with the movements music, because he's doing exactly the same thing. He's putting meaning related to the movements that he understands in the music, as I've expressed in a number of places already. So here is the Witch's House on Hen's Legs. And let me see if I can get the... Oh, good. Sorry, I didn't want to have to take the time to turn the page just where things are getting exciting. So here's the witch's house on hen's legs. So, let's deconstruct this piece of music. And in his introduction to the fairy tales, Thomas de Hartmann says that the professor, the piano professor, should play for the children these pieces and explain to them so that they can then put this imagination, this image of what is being that he has composed, the image of this story goes into their playing of the piece. So we begin with the house, and he goes like this, just to remind you. And you can ask yourself why he does this. What is that about? So why is he not just doing... And it's because this is a house that moves. It's a house that wiggles. It's a house that stands up on its hen's legs and it walks. So, there is the house. It looks still, but no. Then it begins to creep up on the child. And we have this. And then it repeats. He does that again, it repeats. At which point, there is a little dance. Now, if you go back to what I was talking about a long time ago, about the meaning of intervals, I think it was the third conversation that we had, where we were talking about the meaning of the different intervals, the augmented fourth, the tritone, is the symbol of the Harnel Aut, which we talked about there. You can go back and listen to it. And it was also indicated in the kitchen enneagram as the point where the fire comes in. So that's the fire. That interval, which is, popularly in television series like Dragnet and many other places, is used to indicate something threatening or fire or hot. And as I said, here is Baba Yaga, who has a nice warm oven. So she begins to do a little dance. And it... Okay, and it continues, and she gets closer and closer and closer to capturing this child, which is indicated by... At which point, Ivan Tsarevich appears to save the day. And Baba Yaga backs off. And then we're back to In the Forest, the House on Hen's Legs. And it concludes like that. So I just wanted to put it out to you that this information, the way Thomas de Hartmann is thinking is very visual, and many people have noticed that in his compositions, he was also a composer, just to skip ahead. He composed 53 film scores in the 1940s, and his music always has a certain kind of cinematic aspect to it. Not always, but very often it can be cinematic. Okay, so now that's the Russian fairy tale. Now I want to go back, and I just want to make sure what our time is. How is our time doing?
We're not in bad shape, but I think that we should probably try to find a point soon to wrap this one up. So
okay,
see where you can take that.
Okay, so 5 minutes, is that what you're thinking?
Sure.
Okay, so now I want to take this. The next step is to look at what Thomas de Hartmann's musical influences were, and in order to do that, we have to go back to, he was born in 1884. His father died when he was 9. So 1893. And his father, after his father died, must have been, there's a whole psychological thing that goes on where, there's even been conversations about doing a documentary or a drama on Hartmann and his whole thing with father figures, which we can get into at some point. But his father dies, and Hartmann is sent off to a military school. And I think this was in St. Petersburg. And at this military school, at the age of 9, and of course these ages may have to be adjusted according to what his birthday now is known to be, but at the age of 9, supposedly, he was sent to the military school, and it was there that his musical talent was recognized by the director. He had already been composing from about the age of 4 or 5, but we have very, very little of that material to draw upon. But the point is that the director of the military school that he was in allowed him to go to study with a very famous composer at the time, Anton Arensky. Now, Anton Arensky, and he worked with Arensky from 1896 to 1906 when Arensky died. And Arensky was known as one of the great Russian romantic composers. He was not quite on the same level that Tchaikovsky was, but it was in that mode of ultra romanticism. And Hartmann, as I said, that was his first real grounding in music, was in this Russian romanticism. And strangely enough, or maybe not so strangely, the fact is that most of Hartmann's music is as far out as it gets, and it does get quite far out, as we will explore. It always remains. He always keeps a certain romanticism in his music. It can always be discovered. And I thought that since we're getting close to the end of this time, I would play for you a piece of music that Hartmann composed in 1899, which now makes him 15 years old. This is one of the three Trois Morceaux that he composed that was published already in 1899 by the Jurgensen editions, as he was already becoming known in Russia. And you will hear the Russian romanticism very, very clearly in this piece of music, okay? And I have to say, this is a mazurka, Opus 4, number 2. All right. So I think it's good to leave in medias res because I want to also talk about this piece a little bit more in detail when we begin the next time and relate it to one of the movements because I think that I see a relationship between one of the Gurdjieff movements and what we hear in the middle of this piece. But we'll leave this till next time. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I forget that I'm muted. Thank you for playing that. It was a very beautiful and moving piece, and I think that it actually finds its way to touching the feelings in a way that those of us who have had experience with that would notice. It was a very sensitively written piece, beautiful. So again, thanks so much for playing that. We'll reconvene in a week. See you then.
Okay.